In today's video, we're going to put together a radial laced wheel. This is the wheel that I'm going to use for parts. Came off of one of the junk bikes. So briefly, what we're doing is we're going to change the way the spokes come out of the hub and into the rim. This rim is currently laced what they call 3X. If you take a look at this spoke, it crosses 1, 2, 3 places here before it gets to the rim. Now the reason that they lace them like this is that it gives the wheel a lot of extra strength. This spoke, as it crosses, mostly this other spoke here, these cross, they kind of support each other. One spoke is pushing in, the other one's pushing out, and equally on the next spoke over, that's happening as well. And it gives the wheel a lot of side-to-side strength just by having that. As well, this spoke is pulling on the hub at an angle, which doesn't stress the hub out as much. Now what we're going to be doing is these spokes are going to go straight out from the hub. They're going to go straight from here, straight out, and actually it makes the wheel quite a bit weaker, but in all honesty it looks pretty cool. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and disassemble this wheel. Now when disassembling a wheel, it's good to go ahead and start off by loosening each spoke by about 1/4 of a turn. Now the reason for that is that the spokes are quite tight, and the cumulative force on this rim is pretty significant. So by going ahead and 1/4 turning these each loose, you can avoid putting any kind of a permanent twist into this rim. So I'm only about halfway around the rim at this point, and these nipples are definitely a lot easier to turn. It's that last 1/4 turn or so when you're building a wheel, you really get most of the tension on these spokes. Now I've got all the spokes loosened a little bit. I'm starting to take them out just one by one. Going ahead and just saving the nipples on the end of the spokes. I'm expecting that when I go to build the wheel, I have some stainless steel wire that I can use for spokes. But I'm going to go ahead and build the wheel back up after I get all my extra holes drilled in and everything like that. For the radial spokes. I'm expecting to have a lot more spokes in here, to complete the look. And I have my wheel disassembled into the hub, spokes, and rim. And now is probably a good time to discuss what I have in mind for this. So if you've seen any of my other videos, you may know that I made this penny farthing bike, the high wheel. And the way that this is laced together is you have a spoke that starts at the rim, does its crosses, goes down to the hub, passes through the hub, and goes back up to the rim. So there's no head on these spokes. These spokes are actually twice as long. Now if you look closely on the hub, you'll see there's twice as many holes as there are spokes. And the reason for that is that originally I had made spokes that went just the one way, just from the hub to the rim. But I had some trouble getting this rim lined up, and I thought it might be easier with these spokes, so I tried that. So when I respoked the other wheel, I ended up with this nice shiny stainless steel wire that I have no other use for, and will work very nicely for spokes on the radial wheel. I do plan to lace this hub similar to the penny farthing wheel, in that there's not going to be a head to the spoke. The spoke is going to go from the rim through the hub back into the rim. One of the things I was mentioning previously is that we're going to be adding spokes, and the question is how many. We can double the spokes, or we can quadruple the spokes. There's really not a way to do it just by adding 20 more spokes or whatever. This is currently a 36 spoke rim. So as I look at this, I think that adding one more spoke in here is going to be a pretty tight pattern. Trying to add 3 more spokes is going to be way too much. So I had some ideas figured out as to how I was going to drill out this hub for the extra holes, but I don't think that that's going to be necessary. The one thing that will be a disadvantage to just adding one more spoke, however, is that the holes in the rim aren't in the center. They're offset by maybe like half a hole width, and that's so that this hole, which is closer to the top, would go to this side of the hub, and the one that's closer to the bottom would go down towards the bottom of the hub. So we're going to have a little bit of an imbalance here, but since these spokes aren't going to be too tight, and since the imbalance is going to be exactly the same on all of them, I'm hoping that that we can get away with that. Lastly, there's a seam. In aluminum rims specifically, we'll have a seam in there, and I think I may need to go ahead and weld that seam shut, since we're going to have a spoke hole essentially right there. So that's something that's going to have to be considered. Well, my weld came out okay on this side, and not too bad on the top here, but this other side is a total disaster. I think I'm going to start over. So I've got my weld mostly to my liking. I'm starting to grind it off. I want to polish it smooth so there's no weld mark, but I did have a bit of a gap there, so I ground it out to get the impurities out, and I'll go ahead and try to fill that. So I've got my joint ground down pretty close to flush with the rest of the material, and now I'm just hitting it with a hand file. I think one of the mistakes I've made in the past is try to grind it until it's exactly flush, and I guess what I end up there with is with a big divot. So the hand file, I'm hoping to go slower and hopefully get a better result. Well, after a little bit of grinding, a little bit of filing, and a little bit of sanding, I got that to where I think it looks pretty nice. There's a little divot that you can see right here, but that was actually in the rim from before. And there's a little divot on that side too. It's not much bigger than the divot on the other side. And considering my skill at welding, I think I'm better off just leaving it. I'm going to go ahead and, before I put everything together, so I'll get polished out. So I'll sand it with some finer sandpaper and then polish it on the buffing wheel, and I think it's going to look fine. One of the things that I learned when I was making the penny farthing wheel is that even though making a wheel isn't necessarily all that challenging if you can follow the directions, what is challenging is making a wheel out of homemade spokes. So the plan here is to go ahead and I'm going to lace up the wheel as it originally was, and then I'll only be replacing one spoke at a time. So with that, I'm hoping to be able to maintain the integrity of the wheel. When I built the penny farthing wheel, I had a lot of trouble with having the hub in the center. We had trouble with the wheel twisting and the rim twisting. I mean, anything you can imagine. So hopefully this will be a better strategy. So going ahead, and I'm going to mark the original spoke holes with a little bit of nail polish so that when I build the wheel up, I'll know exactly which holes to use. Shouldn't be a problem, but it's easier to mark it now than wish I had later. So I've sanded the whole rim down with 80 grit sandpaper, and then followed up with some 60 grit. If you take a close look, there's still a few scratches, a couple nicks that are pretty deep, and I'm not going to try to sand down to those all the way. I'm not looking for an absolutely perfect from every standpoint, no matter how close you get to this mirror shine. I just want it to look nice from a bit of a distance. this is certainly not going to be a showpiece. I'm stopping with 60 grit for now because I'm going to go ahead and mark my new spoke holes. So to be able to do that, I need to get a can of a little bit of paint on here. So one thing I hadn't considered up until now, and I'm going to have to figure out what to do, is I won't be able to put a spoke right there because that's the hole for the filler valve, for the Schrader valve. So instead of this being perfectly would be a 72 spoke rim. Looks like it's going to be a 71 spoke rim possibly. Not exactly sure what to do there, but we'll get it figured out. I've got a coat of black spray paint here so that I can see my marks better. It's just a light guide coat that I can take off really easy. And what I'm doing here is I've measured the distance across the rim, and I'm just kind of scratching into this the locations for my hole straight up the center. Just a light scratch just into the paint. I went ahead and double checked that my scratch is in the same spot from either side. So I'm pretty close to the center. Typically in rim design, you don't want to move these holes around too much because you can really move the whole rim around quite a bit by where those holes are and how tight those spokes are. You can pull a rim that's out of round by more than a quarter inch simply by tightening spokes. So, but with this being a radial design, I'm not thinking that it's going to matter as much. Also, I'm going to go ahead with not having a spoke where the Schrader valve comes through. So using this divider, I am now marking halfway in between the spoke holes. So just a tiny scratch. All I need to do is be able to see it. In some of these holes, I didn't think I was getting a very accurate center point, but by dropping a nipple into the hole, I'm getting a much nicer registration on that. So the trouble was that that the divider was at a funny angle here. By the time I dropped it in, sticking that nipple in there kind of solves that. As I'm using the drill press to go ahead and drill out these holes that I've marked, I'm finding that's what's working best. Even on the aluminum, that drill's wanting to walk around. So I'm just coming down with the press and hitting my mark first, putting just a tiny little indent in there with the end of the drill, and then turning it on. Drilling it out. Now that I have all my holes drilled, time to start getting this polished up. I'm going to go ahead and start off with a Scotch-Brite pad. This one's kind of coarse, but I'm pretty sure it's finer than the 60 sandpaper that I used last time. So after hitting this with a wire wheel and then buffing it with cloth, I don't exactly have a mirror finish here, but it's pretty shiny. So I don't know that I was looking for perfection. You get it exactly perfect, and then you feel pretty sad every time. A little marker, scratch, or some dirt or whatever. So I want it to look nice. I'm not expecting it to be a mirror. So I think I'm going to be pretty satisfied with this. So the plan here is swing by Home Depot a little bit later and get some shiny clear coat. Go ahead and hit it on the buffer one more time, and then get some clear coat on this so that whatever shine is there can stay. In all honesty, I was kind of hoping that the clear coat would bring out a little bit more of a shine, a little bit more of a silver luster, but well, we'll see how it goes when the paint dries. So I have my wheel back together now. The next step I plan to take is to start replacing the spokes with my stainless steel wire, one at a time. So now that I have this wheel laced up with the original lacing pattern, I'm going to start replacing spokes. So I'm going to start, I think, with this spoke, and as I eyeball it down, it's going to go here. So we're going to go ahead and pull these two spokes out and put in a new spoke. So as I'm tightening the spokes on this first radial, it's really tough to get the bend out of these. So what I tried was annealing this wire, heating it up until it's red hot, and kind of takes the bend out of it, but it also takes the color off of it. And so what I tried to do was go ahead and polish it off on the buffing wheel, and the wheel caught it and bent that wire pretty good. So anyway, I may end up redoing that spoke. We'll see as I tighten it up if it straightens up. In my experience, as you're building a wheel, that last spoke usually gets bent up anyway, and then as you ride it, it straightens out. So we'll see, but looks like I'm going to have to anneal these. So to anneal the stainless steel, I'm just heating it up in the propane torch. Once it gets the color changed to red, and then you've done your job. So running through here. Now the hottest part of the flame is just the tip of the darker blue. So pretty clear that that's where it turns red the quickest. Just for comparison, this is super springy and darn near impossible to take the bend out of it. This, on the other hand, straightens out rather nicely now that it's been heated. Unfortunately, we lost our pretty shiny stainless steel look and have to polish that back in. So the way I've been doing this is I'm rolling down a nipple onto the end of this threaded piece of wire. The idea is I'll drop the wire in and eyeball where that hole lies, and then I'll just bend it over. So I end up with that. So then I go ahead and lace the spoke in. And the thing is that I'm really just looking to get the spokes in here for now, just kind of laced in the direction that they're going to go. A lot of these spokes are long. They're going to have to be cut short. Some of the spokes need to be threaded more with the die, but this is just to kind of get it close. So then the idea is that once I've got the whole thing in and my pattern's in there and the wheel's about balanced, then I'm going to start tightening these spokes and then adjusting the length of them, both the threaded portion and the part that sticks out beyond the wheel. Clearly, you can't have any spoke beyond the end of the nipple here, otherwise it'll just puncture the tube. So I've got my wheel laced up. All the spokes are in. Clearly, they're not very straight, so but I just have them laced in there loosely, just kind of get a rough idea of where everything needs to be. So the next step is to start with the die, start threading these ends a little bit better. Quite a few loose spokes here. There's a good example, where the nipple doesn't quite make it down. So so I need to go ahead and get those threads straightened out, get these long spokes trimmed. Some of these spokes just barely make it to the wheel, which is actually good. It's maybe just a millimeter or two short from where you'd ideally want it, but as we straighten the spoke out, it's going to meet it. So those need to be threaded and get a nipple on those as well. So, but the wheel is laced. It is pretty reasonably round, and but we will be checking that in a little while as well. So now that I have this wheel laced up, my satisfaction, I'm working on the original spokes first. So all the new spokes are that's for the future. But right now, what I'm doing is I'm taking the nipple off. I'm marking the length, just using a Sharpie, trimming the spoke to length. I'm using a spoke and cable cutter so that I don't get a big flat on my spoke. And I'm cutting the threads. I'm just using a 256 die here. I have a spoke thread roller that you can use for cutting custom length spokes, but this wire is too thick for that. For the roller, what it actually does when you roll a thread is you form it, and the wire can only be a certain thickness because the high parts of the thread have to go somewhere, and this wire is too thick. So I'm having to cut these threads. And now that I've got my thread cut to length and my spoke is cut to length, I'm going to put the spoke back on. So I'm expecting this to be a bit of an iterative process. I'll probably have to cut all these spokes at least once more, and I'll probably have to, I'll have to probably cut these threads more too. As these wires become straight, as they get pulled in, then the ends of these spokes will start to come into the wheel here. So now that I have all the wires that went into the original spoke holes trimmed and enough threads cut on them, I'm going to go ahead and true up this wheel in the forks. So there's tons of videos on how to do that, so I won't go over it. But I'm going to go ahead and do that before I worry too much about the new spoke wires. So I now have this wheel reasonably well tuned up. It's got about 1/8 of an inch run out at the edge here, and maybe about 1/8 or a little bit more of side-to-side wiggle, which isn't exactly perfect. But as I tighten these spokes to get these wires straight, I'll be playing with that the whole time for the rest of this project, so I think that's going to be good enough. So now that I got this wheel reasonably well balanced, I'm doing the center spokes. In other words, this spoke was here before, that spoke was here before, this is a new one. So I'm clipping them to length and threading them, and right now I'm only just snugging them up a little bit so as not to pull this wheel out of round or out of balance. And then once they're all done, then I'll start tightening them up in increments. So I now have all my wires threaded for the nipples, and I went ahead and I turned all the center spokes in a quarter turned. Some of them are super loose, so I turned them more than that, but they're all a quarter turned. The wheel's still pretty much in balance. Go ahead and give it another quarter turn and continue quarter turn at a time until we run into a problem with the wheel either being in balance or that all the spokes are nice and snug. So I've got this wheel tuned pretty well, and I've got all my spokes tightened up about as much as I think I'd like to for now. The spokes aren't perfectly straight. You can see there's some here that still have a little bend in it and so forth, but I think that the best way to get those out is to get some miles on this wheel, and those will pull straight. They'll loosen up, really tune the wheel, and I'll be able to get them straight. So I think that the next step for now is And all these spokes turned brown when I heated them up, but brown isn't exactly bling. So I got started already on this one spoke, you can see. You can get these things polished up and get them nice and shiny again. Got this shoelace wrapped around the spoke. A little bit of valve grinding compound. You can use polish if you want to just polish the spokes, but you really need to take off this brown stuff, which is pretty aggressive. So, and the valve grinding compound seems to be working pretty well. And simply by rolling this back and forth, up and down the spoke, it's hard to tell in the lighting, but it's clear that that spoke looks pretty nice now. So all these spokes are done, and they're silver. All these spokes aren't, and they're a lot browner. So I probably need to come in here with a little bit of a finer grit to really get some shine on these, but that's certainly turning them the color that I'd like them to be. So we've got our wheel mounted, and it's looking pretty good, I think. Some of the spokes are still not quite arrow straight. Like I said, as we ride it, we'll be able to pull them a little bit tighter, and they will straighten out over time. I would expect after half a dozen rides, these are going to look really pretty straight. And after that, they'll continue to straighten a bit more, but less and less as time goes by. Leave any comments, thoughts, or suggestions in the comments below. Try to get to them all, and interested to hear what people have to say about it. Have a great day. Thanks for watching my video.